Hello and welcome to another episode. Today we take a look at a very special model, the Porsche 989. A four-door, five-seater sedan prototype. It was actually more than a prototype. It got to a stage where it was a working prototype developed to compete with the likes of Mercedes, BMW, and believe it or not, it had a V8 engine with a power output of around 350 horsepower and I think a displacement of around 4.2 liters, which is an incredible amount with a top speed of just shy of 280 kilometers an hour. Before I delve into any more details with regards to the car, I want to first take a look back at the history of Porsche and the people working at Porsche at the time and how this prototype and other production models that came to be. My first point of call is this name right here, Ulrich Bez. He is a man synonymous in the world of automotive, as we will soon discover. But let's look at his history within Porsche, because he is a defining moment within the company's history and in this very specific 989 prototype project. So he first had a stint at Porsche in the 1970s, establishing Porsche's crash test program. He then left and went on to BMW and set up their very famous BMW technique responsible for the Z series, like the BMW Z1, which was always a very fascinating and interesting car to me. And I think it was and still is one of the cars that are way ahead of their time. However, he was then tempted back to Porsche in 1988 to help save the company because it was doing disastrously with the introduction of the 964. Porsche had hoped that this model would bring about some success, and unfortunately the model, well, I never thought it was any good, and clearly sales reflected that. So he came back to try and save the company and rapidly update the 911 model, even though members of the board within the company wanted to actually ditch the 911 altogether and try and focus on a different lineup of cars. However, he said Porsche is 911. So he went on about introducing and pushing for a revised 911, a new 911, and that's where the 993 came about. Another important factor in all of this is another name, and that's Harm Lagaay, which is another synonymous name, who's worked now at Porsche for 20 years. He's now retired, of course, but he was a colleague of Ulrich Bez at BMW, and he brought him to Porsche, and they worked together on the 989 and the 993, and he was responsible for designing the iconic Carrera GT and the 996 alongside Pinky Lai. So he's a great man and very technically advanced, and of course in terms of design pushed the boundaries. Now, Porsche had previously tried to dabble in the four-door sedan market and created a prototype based on the 928 Porsche, which at the time was selling very well, and Porsche thought they could add a four-door sedan to the lineup and created this prototype, which is dubbed the H50. Porsche quickly scrapped that idea because they didn't like the overall aesthetic, and the board members quickly dismissed it. However, with the return of Ulrich Bez to the company, he was adamant on bringing about some change to the Porsche lineup, and that's where he pushed for the 993, but also the 989. And so they went on to develop the car completely, engine, specifications, and everything, and it got high praise all across the board. Now, if we take a look at the car, its lines, its proportions, are just right. It's very much 911 with four doors, and that's really the car that we should have always gotten. Instead, we ended up having the Panamera, and it was very bulbous, very in your face. The proportions were not right at all. However, this was just right. Really, the lines, everything just was perfect on the car. Even the front headlights, they weren't pop out. They were just sort of sleek, flush like the 993. Overall, the aesthetic, even around the back, was really graceful. Sadly, things were not meant to be for him at Porsche. He was actually scooped up by Aston Martin and helped bring the company back from ashes to great worldwide success with incredible models that we are very familiar with, including some of my very favorites, the Vanquish, the 177, and the Aston Martin Rapide. And we are left to wonder and ponder once again at this marvelous, beautiful 989 prototype, which again, let me just remind you, had a 4.2 liter engine, 350 horsepower, 280 kilometers, V8. I mean, it's wonderful. And look at the proportions, look at the style, the grace. It really was a 911 with 4 doors. Just incredible. Instead, we ended up with the Panamera, which now for the most part looks much better than it initially did when it came out. But as with these things, you just don't know how history ends up coming out. But we are left with this beautiful model to marvel at and just wonder what could have been. Yeah, just an incredible piece of history, an incredible piece of automotive engineering and design. And I'm glad to have been able to bring it to you guys, for me to learn myself about this incredible model, but also hopefully share some insight with you. So, as always, thank you so much for watching. I know this is a little different than my usual style, but since we are in lockdown, we're having to be creative, and it's actually led me at least, to get a lot more insight into the world of Porsche. I have a very exciting episode coming out, I think tomorrow or the day after, about a very fascinating 996 prototype. So stay tuned. Don't forget to subscribe, click that like button, and I will see you again very soon.